And I'll just do a few intros and then I'll get to Maka. So um, firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting, pay respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present, and I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And I invite you all, if you are visiting from anywhere else in Australia or anywhere that there are Indigenous lands in where you are in the world, feel free to put it in the chat. Maybe just put your name, where you're from, and your role, just so we have an idea of the kind of people that are here. And then I'm going to do some introductions. So firstly, I'm just going to explain. My name is Bree Norton. I'm co-chair with Amanda Mace of OZeWAI, the digital accessibility professional organisation. We're a not-for-profit here in Australia. We used to run annual conferences, and now we're running more of these online conferences, and we're running membership so that we can actually build careers and career pathways for digital accessibility professionals. So visit us at OZeWAI.org anytime. And please consider subscribing and joining to learn more about being a digital accessibility professional. I'm also going to just check a few housekeeping things as well. We are only going for an hour, so we don't have a break. But if anyone does need a break, feel free to just mute and take your picture away if you do need to go away. For our panelists as well, if you do happen to ask a question, Léonie, I'm going to suggest that people say their name first. Is that okay with you?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite good in a panel environment as well that usually we ask, Léonie, can you go next or whatever, but when it comes to the questions, they can never get lost. So just a reminder just to say that your name first. And otherwise, I'm just going to do some intros of our panelists to set the scene. First, I'd like to introduce Amanda Mace, who is the Vice President of AbleDocs for Australasia. And she's the leading global digital, which is the leading global digital provider in the world. So in her role, she manages the Australasia office while growing and promoting the AbleDocs brand across the region. Amanda is co-chair of the Australian Accessibility Initiative, which is OZeWAI, and is the W3C Australian Western Region Office Manager. Is also one of the two Australian-based W3C evangelists. Our other one being Dr. Manisha Amin, who is the Chief Strategist and Visionary at Centre for Inclusive Design, with a background in strategic marketing, communication, transforming cultures and creativity. She's a thought leader in the power of thinking from the edge. Manisha has a unique talent for seeing beyond the horizon to emerging trends, defining them and building powerful communities to bring them into being. Manisha is the host of the With, Not For podcast, and has completed a Bachelor of Business Marketing, Masters of Professional Writing, and PhD on Communication and Social Inquiry. I'm going to go to our special guest here. So Léonie Watson is joining us from the UK, or actually I think maybe in Europe you are today, Léonie. So I'll get you to share where you are. But you're the founder and sorry, yes, go for it.
I was just going to say I'm currently just outside Sevilla in Spain.
There you go. Okay. So Léonie is the founder and director of TetraLogical, a member of the W3 Board of Directors and co-chair of the W3C Web Applications Working Group. She's also co-organizer of the Inclusive Design 24, which is coming up very soon. So we can put some links to the chat in as we go through the session, and co-author of the Inclusive Design Principles and the Do No Harm Guide, Centering Accessibility in Data Visualization. And I'm going to go to our MC now, to Maka. Maka believes in the power of technology for the benefit of the underprivileged. And I've had the pleasure to get to know Maka over the last few months and bring him into the fold of OZeWAI. Maka works with large organisations across government and private enterprise to improve the way they utilise their technology through innovation with a view of making the biggest positive impact upon those most in need. Maka is currently the CTO of Alliance ICT and has had the privilege of performing various roles across various organisations. So I'd like to welcome you all here today. We have an amazing response to this panel, and I'm really not too sure if anyone has kind of discussed this topic before, and it's about running or, basically building accessibility consultancy companies. So I'm going to pass it over to Maka. And for everyone else on the call, if you do have questions throughout the time that we're going, it is a panel, please put it in the chat. and we'll be sending that through to the panelists for Maka to manage as he asks the questions. But over to you, Maka. I think we'll start with one of your first questions.
Thank you very much, Bree. It's such a privilege and an honor to be here tonight to host an amazing stellar star panel. And as we navigate through such an interconnected world, it's super important that we ensure we continue to deliver on the promise for equality and access, especially in opportunities for all individuals. And certainly the panelists that we have tonight are pioneers in this area. And everybody gets a very unique opportunity to speak to folks that have dedicated their lives to and determined efforts to try and deliver on this commitment of equity and inclusivity. So what an honor it is to be here to discuss these things with you. And there's been some amazing questions asked of these professionals about what is it like to run an accessibility consultancy company. So I put it to the panel. What was your original vision for the organization, and has it changed over time?
Maka, did you want to actually direct that to a particular person?
No, it's definitely to whomever feels like answering this one first.
I can take a run at this. So TetraLogical is still comparatively new. We're just coming up on 5 years old. So our vision in the beginning was to be a small consultancy company. Myself and the others who have built this company, we've all worked for some of the bigger companies here in the UK, in the US and other places. And although we recognize that what they do and the ways that they do it are very worthwhile, very necessary, we wanted to remain small. And the reason we wanted to stay a small company was because, firstly, we didn't want to be all about accessibility audits. It's very easy to fall into that trap as an accessibility consultancy. And secondly, and this is the real driver for us, we didn't want to be constrained by having a stock catalog of services and being able to deliver those very well, but not really being able to flex and adapt to do things a little more creatively. So we wanted people to come to us with problems and say, look, we've seen your services and we think a bit of this and some of the other is probably what we need, but also something that you don't mention on your website. Can you help? And that's really, where we've arrived at. So for us, in the few short years we've been in existence, no, the vision hasn't really changed at all. If anything, it's been confirmed and reaffirmed many times over.
Thank you, Léonie. And to dig a little bit deeper into the vision, TetraLogical, if you break the name up, it means the logical considerations of 4 important elements: ethical, original, sustainable, and inclusive. Had you always envisaged that you would find a balance between the 4? And had you ever felt like through your vision that the 4 elements of TetraLogical had been challenged along the way?
So the name and the principles sort of emerged together, as you've kind of quite rightly identified. Yes, they've been challenging in places, but more usefully, they've been a framework, a wall that we've been able to put our backs against. So when we are facing difficult decisions, which every organization does from time to time, they've been a great place to return to and ask ourselves, are we making decisions that respect the principles that we put in place at the beginning? We've also evolved them a little bit as well, as with many things. When we started off, we realized we hadn't maybe explained ourselves as well as we thought we could, and so we've tweaked and edited them a little bit over the years. But yeah, more than a challenge, they've been a really great help to us, I think.
What a wonderful insight into the challenges that are faced, but also the continual pursuit for the achievement of the vision that you set out as an entrepreneur. Thank you very much for that response. Manisha, I'm wondering about the services and products that you've designed over your time as an accessibility expert, but particularly in the things that you've delivered for the accessibility community. Can you shed some light on the things that you've contributed to the community by way of tools and services?
Well, absolutely. But there's someone I'd like to give a shout out to. Natalie Collins is on the line as well. If you put your screen on there, Natalie, because a lot of the things that have been developed at the Centre for Inclusive Design were done before especially in accessibility, were done before I actually arrived at the organisation. And Natalie, who's on this call, was one of the key drivers for a lot of the that material and information as well. So it certainly hasn't always been my vision. It's been, I think, one of the things I love about the Centre for Inclusive Design is that we have a collective vision that has really been designed by the need to deliver social equity and equality in a range of different ways. And that has continued from when we were the Australian Captioning Centre through to Media Access Australia and now to the Centre for Inclusive Design. So when we think about the products we have around accessibility, I think Léonie hit the nail on the head. You don't want to just become an organisation that only does auditing, though we do audit. We also have the PCWA, which is a professional certificate in web accessibility, which is, I guess, a starting point for people who are new to the sector and want to understand how accessibility might work before they go for one of the broader accreditations that are out there. We also have a whole range of resources on our website, etc., as well, so that people who are interested in accessibility can start thinking about their pathways into the sector. Is that kind of what you were after?
It's absolutely what I'm after,
because
it delivers an insight into not just the service that you provide to the public, but also to practitioners as well, to help practitioners be better at what they do. And I must say, Manisha, the research that the Centre for Inclusive Design has delivered with the benefit of designing for everyone has been profound. And some of the insights have delivered quite interesting learnings. For example, the fact that 5 million Australians across the country are unable to access products and services, but they possess $40 billion in annual disposable income. What are the key lessons that you've learned out of this research, and how has that benefited your organisation in terms of its pursuits as a consultancy?
Look, you know, this is a room of practitioners, so I'll say the first insight that I got was that keeping it simple really works. So when we first worked with PwC to put this report together, the reason we put the report together was we were told that there were no numbers around accessibility and it was just a good thing to do. And then that broader concept of inclusive design as well, that was just a good thing to do. And it really didn't help businesses any. And so we were told we needed to put some numbers around it. And I looked for numbers around the world, and certainly there were numbers around disability spending, there were numbers around certain pieces, but it was always about one group, not everyone. So that's what we tried to do. However, when we spoke to our teams and people who supported us through the work, it seemed quite complicated. And we were very nervous when the report first came out that it was too simplistic. But what I'd forgotten was actually what's simple to us is really complicated to most people in Australia and most businesses who don't spend all their time thinking about inclusion or accessibility or equity or equality for that matter. So the key learning for me was to keep things simple, to have some stats, some good visualizations, but also alternative ways for people to access the information has meant that report kind of has kept giving. And, you know, we benefit from it, certainly, but really, actually, we don't benefit as much from it as the people who are working in organizations who are maybe the only accessibility person, or, you know, they're one of 2 or 3 people who are really trying to push this agenda up the food chain. That's when this report really sings, because it speaks to leaders rather than professionals.
Amazing. Thank you very, very much for that insight. And keeping it simple has to be a solid piece of advice for entrepreneurs out there, especially those that are making their way in the accessibility field. Amanda, what an achievement AbleDocs has been. It delivers such a comprehensive set of services. It makes me wonder, what is the most common type of work that you get asked to do and that AbleDocs gets asked to do, given the comprehensive nature of its capabilities?
Well, it's really interesting because, of course, we're a global firm with head offices based out of Toronto, Canada. So in Australia, by far, the most requests we get are around consultancy and training for accessible web products. But in North America, that's not true. So we sort of, where I guess Australia tends to be web first in terms of people getting into accessibility. That's been their sort of driver to understand digital accessibility. But in North America, that hasn't, a lot of people kind of have an idea about web accessibility. They're probably a little bit ahead of us in terms of that for whatever reason. Probably the 4,000 lawsuits in America last year had something to do with that. So in North America, the majority of our requests are coming from people wanting to make PDFs accessible as a special skill, just like making web accessible is a special skill. And you need to know how to do it and the standards around that. So there's a standard for accessible PDFs. It's called PCWA. It's an ISO standard. So we do an awful lot of work in North America around that. We're starting to get some work here in Australia around that, but people very much the majority is help us with our website. What do we do? What does this mean? We do a lot of, and I suspect Manisha is the same, and Léonie maybe as well, we do a lot of education still. We're still very much educating around this space and that things can be accessible and just getting the word out.
And can you account for the differences across geographies in terms of the requests for the types of services?
Yeah, well, who knows? I think that I find it really interesting that where the strictest laws are, like in America, where we have lawsuits, where it's being sort of tried out in courts, and some of those are being pushed back now. Certainly in the state of New York, they've had some pushback where judges have said, don't bring me this, that's not really blocking you type thing. They're not any better. Those websites aren't much better than the Australian ones, to be perfectly honest. So I'm not sure that the legal case is actually making anything more accessible, which is an interesting topic in itself. But I do think that there's probably a bit more awareness. And maybe that's because, as Léonie pointed out, there's a lot of very big firms, particularly in North America, doing accessibility. So there's more education out there. And one of the things is with my co-chair of OZeWAI hat on that I want to do is make sure that that type of education is also happening here in Australia. This region needs more education around accessibility. The fact that almost weekly I hear someone say, I didn't know that someone who's blind could use a computer, is concerning. We need to get more education out there in this region, and that it's not too hard to do, that we can do it simply, that there's lots of low-hanging fruit, and every little bit counts. Starting the journey is not the hard bit.
We've got this instance in Australia with the Disability Royal Commission report being released at the end of this month. And I can see that James Newton in the commentary has made an observation about the interest around this report and what it might say about accessibility design, ICT procurement, and how it hopefully or might raise a very strong concern with employment and education hearings. And I think to your point, hopefully it will significantly raise awareness around the nation and increased education around accessibility. Do you see that there are positive outcomes that can come from these Royal Commissions, or do you find that they often end up being a big flash in the pan and don't make too much of an impact?
I think if we as professionals are bringing them up, and Manisha made the great point that it's the champions who do the hard work for us as professionals. We come in and because we've got that SME hat on, we get to say, what's accessible and what isn't and how to best go about it. But it's actually the champions in the organizations who are utilizing things like a Royal Commission report to say, hey, we have to do this. This is a problem. They're really doing the hard work because they're pushing back against, not great arguments, but they're pushing back. And it's difficult to do that without some data. So things like the report that Center for Inclusive Design put out, which is a fantastic report, and I frequently still share it because those stats are fantastic. The Royal Commission report, these things are really important. They're resources that are invaluable in Australia that affect our region. I think what's most interesting around this most recent report is actually the fact that it's based on employment and education. That to me, this is an area that we don't cover well enough in Australia, again, because we're still doing a lot of educating. So we tend to get lots of questions around public-facing websites, public-facing products in general, not enough about what's happening internal in intranets and internal software and procurement for people in education and in their own employment. So I think that will be really interesting. It's certainly a resource that we'll share as widely as we possibly can and put it into the hands of the people who are trying to get accessibility happening within their organization.
Well, Amanda brings up a really good point about the distinction of what happens regarding accessibility for public-facing products and the accessibility of internal products. We have had a question from the chat room from Ricky. Thanks, Ricky. Do panel members think independent consultancies achieve better results than accessibility people and teams within companies, i.e. from the outside in, or rather than from the...
Are we losing Maka, or is it my computer that's going?
I think we are.
Yeah.
Maka, you might need to come back in and then hop out again. But
I can jump in with the question. So yeah, just to repeat the question, Léonie, it's Bree here. Do panel members think independent consultancies achieve better results than accessibility people teams within companies, i.e. from the outside in rather than from the inside out? So that was to you, Léonie, to start with maybe.
Sure. I don't actually think there's much of a comparison to make because both parts are necessary. Sometimes it's really helpful for an organization to have someone independent come in from the outside. It's often easier to change things, especially, if you're looking around the idea of sustainable accessibility for the whole organization. It can help to have someone come in who can cut through the politics, who isn't caught up in the budget responsibility conversations quite so much. And so I think sometimes that external independence is absolutely what's needed. But equally, there comes a time when you should walk away from the consultants. I don't think any of us should be in the business we're in, to be there in perpetuity for another organization. The idea is, I describe it like learning to ride a bicycle. You want someone to come in and help you learn how to do it. Initially have their hand on the kind of the back of the seat to hold you steady, and then bit by bit take the guiding hand away until the organization's pedaling away under its own steam. And at that point, of course, you need accessibility people within the organization, within teams, championing it, as I think Amanda and Manisha have both touched on. Those are the people who'll really make the sustainable changes once the consultants have done their job and left the organization to it.
I'd like to agree to that. It's Manisha here. I think that in Australia particularly, I think we need more accessibility people in companies. We just don't have enough of them. And if you don't have people in companies working on every product, then products are going to fall through the cracks. And often when an accessibility specialist comes in, it's for those things that are really seen as really important. And so therefore, some things get looked at, other things don't. Where I think we're really great is on large pieces of work where there have been multiple consultants and multiple organizations. So for instance, when we were looking at things like my health records, where you've got large organizations or consulting companies who then hire in staff from all sorts of other places to build the product, some of whom have accessibility experience, some of whom don't. And people who use different ways of dealing with accessibility, you end up with this jigsaw where none of the pieces quite fit correctly. And so in those instances, having a consultant literally audit as you're going helps to break some of the, you can have 3 accessibility experts, all who do things completely differently, and end up with something that's 99% right, but has these little mismatches. It's like having 3 authors write a book. each author will write that book slightly differently. So it's nice to have some uniformity through a process, and people internally or a consulting company, they'll have their own stamp. So I think it's important not to think of one as better results than the other, but to actually think that it's really important to have a healthy ecosystem of both.
I think it's really hard to be successful without the champions inside.
Really.
It's you just, and even if you are, it's only until you're gone, and then it falls through the cracks again. You absolutely need champions, and without them, real change doesn't happen. When we go into an organization, we're trying to create cultural change that needs buy-in from everyone who's touching those teams. So you need champions.
And thinking about those champions, the accessibility specialists inside the organizations, as business people that had run an organization around accessibility, what is some of your advice that you can provide to those struggling insiders that are constantly battling up against their executives, trying to help them understand the fundamentals of accessibility and trying to really help them appreciate the value of it? What's some advice that you can provide to them, Amanda?
Gosh, where to start? Look, some of it's just taking a deep breath. You can't make every change right now. So sometimes you just have to slow down and find some quick, easy wins. I think one of the things that people do when they get into accessibility is become really passionate. And I dare say that the three people on this panel are all very passionate about accessibility. But sometimes passion can be overwhelming, and it can overwhelm other people. Accessibility is a big topic. It's a large umbrella, and it can be overwhelming if you're talking to someone who doesn't understand it, especially if you're really passionate. So you actually have to tone it down a bit and be like, here's an easy win. Here's some low-hanging fruit that we can do, and this is going to be the great impact of that. And just take people on the journey with you by holding their hand rather than tugging them. I think that people get very, very passionate, and I'm certainly guilty of it. In fact, when I first got into the industry, I was too harsh on it. I just, it was fail everything. It's all terrible. Why aren't we doing better? And we do want people to do better, but we've got to bring them on that journey and recognize that it is the journey. So just bring people on your journey.
We have some comments from in the chat room from James and Aormond here that advocates are important around the space, and part of the challenge in accessibility capability is that there are unfortunately a high instances of turnover in organizations, especially in the public service. And so it looks like there's a constant revisiting of the same issues every 5 years, which is an unfortunate situation, especially in the public sector. And we also have another comment here saying, communicating, it's important and it's key, not didactic, persuasive, and encouraging. I think that's a very unique perspective, but something that's shared by all. I can see Kylie Pollock here mentioning that when setting up a consultancy, everyone considers the risks and challenges, but there's a question here from Kylie. What was the most unexpected challenge that you faced, which you couldn't or you didn't plan for? And I'll put that question over to you, Manisha.
Oh, look, a lot, because I didn't start off as an accessibility specialist. I remember 6 years ago ringing Léonie, actually, when I first joined the W3C and saying, I'm a complete fraud and I shouldn't be in this world at all. And she was very generous in her feedback to me. So that was really helpful. I think that in terms of the things that have been surprising is it's not rocket science, accessibility. It really isn't rocket science. And I think that, so that was the first thing, that actually this is a learnable skill. It's not something that's innate that you have to have from birth, that people can become accessibility specialists. But from a business perspective, one of the things that's been really difficult is actually quality control and accessing resources, good staff. And we don't have a lot in this country. And then the other issue with that is with government, you need people who are actually Australian citizens, which, so there's this really interesting thing around who gets to be an accessibility expert and who doesn't get to be one. And when there aren't a lot of people around, it makes it difficult. And, you know, I've just seen the comments there from, I think it was around James. So, you know, people like James, Ricky, Andrew, you know, like there are people on this call. Léonie has been doing this work for a really long time. And yet we're still struggling to find people. We're still struggling to get people in the sector.
And Léonie, you've shared a link to an article here by Henry Swan regarding, I think the name of the article here is "The Only Accessibility Specialist in the Room." And it speaks of key elements like responsibility, relationships, and scale and expectation. And ultimately here, I think the key is delivering support and providing a support network. And even in this experience, we've heard that Manisha has reached out to you. Providing that external support, how powerful do you see that as being an option for accessibility specialists that are at their wits' end, that are struggling?
I think it's critical. I will say so. The author of that is Henny. She's frequently called Henry, but I should correct her name for the record. Otherwise, she won't speak to me again when I get back to work after this.
Thank you.
But it is incredibly important, and I think because we've all benefited from it, and there are, you know, parts of our community all over the web, all over the world that come together to help each other out. You know, there's a Slack channel with, I think, about 10,000-12,000 people in it, all talking and helping each other about accessibility. You know, as Manisha mentioned, you know, there are phone calls, people reach out, you have a chat, you get to know each other, you know, and it becomes a two-way exchange of you know, information. It certainly has for Manisha and myself. So I don't think any of us can do this on our own. And even when we are on our own, perhaps in our organization or in our team, we're not really alone. There are always people. And this is one of the things I love about the accessibility community in particular, is I've always found people willing to be incredibly generous with their time, you know, their information, their guidance, their knowledge. And especially as accessibility has grown, you know, when I started off more years than I care to think about ago, accessibility was really simple. This is back in very early 2000s. The web was really simple. We didn't have apps. We didn't have virtual reality. We didn't have touch interfaces. It was just a good old fashioned, you know, keyboard, mouse, and a very, very simple web by today's standards. But of course, now there's just too much accessibility for any one of us to know. I certainly don't pretend to have all the answers about all the different aspects, and I'd be wary of anyone who did. But I do know there are places where I can go to ask people, hey, look, you know more about Android development accessibility than I do. Can you help me with this question? Or, you know, whatever aspect of accessibility it may be. So I think we'd be all, you know, much the poorer if it wasn't for the community, the relationships that we have out there.
And being open means that we can continue to learn and evolve and improve our skill sets, doesn't it? And Manisha, you're right. It's not a rocket science, but there's certainly a science to it for sure. And an established practice and a thriving practice is an important one, especially a close community. I'm interested in this comment here raised by Megan. Megan says, I've often had stand-up arguments with third-party providers about what is and what isn't accessible. Do others experience this conflict? Amanda, do you?
Oh, frequently. Frequently. Unfortunately, yes. Look, it's really interesting because, you know, I've just spent a week in Sevilla, Spain with people who are like-minded, and I wrote on LinkedIn how I felt like my cup was full at the end of the week. I felt so recharged, and we need to do that because you have to have these arguments. You go back to work and someone's pushing back, or someone's making some argument that you're like, that doesn't sit right with me. That's not within the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And you do, third-party vendors and providers present a challenge. And I dare say that even with ICT procurement, with like things like ASEAN 301549, which requires WCAG to be adhered to, people don't know what that means. And third-party providers generally say, yes, we can do it. They want to win the work. So of course it's accessible, and they don't really know any better. There have been a different companies and organizations in Australia have different ways of approaching this. There are some that say, look, if you say you're accessible, you're going to have to go pay for your own audit. Come back to us when they say that is actually accessible. But the companies that do that are pretty small in comparison to the ones that don't. And that's because they have the money to say that. And if they say them, you know, it's going to make a big impact for the provider. Most companies can't or won't be able to push back because they need whatever service or product that third party provider is giving them. So it's really difficult. You're making that argument. Sometimes it helps to bring someone like us in. I don't know if Léonie and Manisha have experienced that. Sometimes it helps to bring that third party in so that internally you're not having that pushback, especially if you're just a product owner or project manager trying to get this through to and on time and within budget, and you're pushing back. But it is difficult, and we certainly experience it.
We've been advocating that when people put in proposals for web design or development, that part of that proposal is the cost of, that they have to prove that they have gotten to a certain percentage on a WCAG audit. So they don't have to, say we've used an external, but they have to, and we've said like a consistent percentage or a certain benchmark. So if they've got the money, we'll say bill in an audit as part of the process, and that it's not actually doing the audit that's the challenge. It's actually doing the remediation after the audit that's the challenge, right? So they have to, that their project doesn't finish until the website doesn't have to be 100% accessible, but it has to actually hit, it has to hit the key criteria for an accessible website.
Yeah, very much agreed. Sorry, Maka.
And Léonie, I'm hearing from that commentary that what matters more is not the review, but it's the action and the outcome, isn't it?
It is very much, but sometimes that action needs to come much earlier on in the process. Yeah. So we tend to get more involved with helping people get the procurement part of it right. And often we'll find, an organization has put into its tender or its contract, this must be AA conformant. And that's great, but as Amanda kind of, wisely mentioned, who the hell determines whether it is or it isn't? So, there's more to the procurement part of the conversation. You've not only got to put your metric in the contract, but also who's responsible. And as Manisha and Amanda have said, sometimes that's just saying, do your in-house evaluation and share the documentation with us so that we can review that. Sometimes, depending on maybe the size of the contract, the nature of the thing to be bought, you might actually require that an independent company is brought in to do that audit for you. If you're buying a CMS or something that some organizations can be looking at millions of pounds or dollars worth in investment, then it's generally a really good idea to put your belts and braces on and make sure you've got that independent evaluation. But if you don't get the procurement right, as Amanda said, everything after that becomes a bit of an uphill struggle, because in some senses you're quite likely both right, and in some senses that's really hard to prove.
Yeah, and that brings up another point as well, is that we're an accessibility company, we're also an inclusive design organization. I kind of separate those two a little bit just because of what you do before you start building, etc. But we still get auditors. We've had OZeWAI audit our work. So just because we are specialists, it doesn't mean that we don't need to be de-biased and we don't need to check our own practices and systems as well. So I think independence is really important, and having somebody de-bias one's work, it doesn't matter how long we've been working, we start to get lazy, or start to think in particular ways. So
look, my kids think it's a great idea that you check your own homework, but we all know that that's not ideal. So I agree 100%, Manisha, that you have to have someone else look at it. I actually had an example today of a client who sent me a bit of code, and I'm like, something's wrong here. And it was literally an ID that was in the wrong place. And I was looking at it, he hadn't seen it. And I sent it off to one of my testers. I was like, can you just look at this? Because something's wrong. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And he kind of came back and said, oh, the ID's in two places and it only need to be in one. Just need to take out that one ID. And it, this developer, I've worked with him for years. He's very, very clever. He had just been looking at that code for too long and just couldn't see it. So it's things like that. You always do need to have those backups, even us as, in fact, more so as accessibility firms. We need to have all of our ducks in a row. I gotta be honest, if I would be pretty horrified if our website was a shambles and not accessible.
It'd be the worst example of not being able to eat your own breakfast, so to speak, and to be able to walk the talk as an expert. And I suppose that leaves all of you amazing experts constantly fraught with worrisome, wondering, is my website completely as accessible as I espouse to be in these panels? Does that keep you up at night, Léonie, Manisha, and Amanda?
Would it be terrible if I said no? I should probably explain that. Yes, of course, the company, we want to put our best foot forward to walk the walk, absolutely. But because we have had our website independently assessed, we've taken a step that gives us a reasonable degree of confidence that we're getting it right. It's not to say we are all the time. We're humans, humans make mistakes. But if I flip this around to my perspective as a person with a disability, I don't necessarily expect websites to be perfectly accessible to me, but I do expect the problems to be dealt with when I report them. And that for me is actually the more important piece of the puzzle, is what happens when someone says, look, this isn't working for me. And so if I bring that back around to the company, if someone comes to me and says, this thing on your website doesn't really work for me, it's, it's not really as accessible as I'd like it to be. It's the way we would respond to that. Listen, try and understand, and then put in place a fix if we can, because we can be work out conformant all we like, but we all know that's not always enough for everybody. So yeah, hopefully we're taking the steps we can to make sure we've done the right things, but it's also being prepared to recognize and deal with times when someone points out that maybe you haven't.
And Léonie, you said earlier that including and embedding accessibility early in projects is super important. I note that Bree has posted in the comments a link to an article titled Embedding Accessibility Early in Projects. And one of the quotes from that article is, accessibility isn't just about wheelchairs and screen readers. It's about optimizing the experience to include as many people as possible. And Léonie, that seems to ring true with some of the commentary about making sure that you've got everybody involved, but also that when problems do arise, that everybody's there to solve them along the way. So I think that's a really good resource for everybody to have a read of. I think there's some more commentary here in the comments. I can see one that says, the more it is requested in calls for tender, the more that it will educate third parties that they need to include accessibility from the beginning if they want to win contracts. And another comment here about third parties regarding accessibility issues with procured software, and the tendency for third parties, almost, I think it says here, to gaslight others in providing their feedback around their assistive software. Yeah. And really the commentary is that you don't know how to use your own software. These third-party vendor issues, they seem to be an ongoing challenge in this ecosystem. Manisha, what is your commentary and observation around the use of third-party vendors and the interaction with third-party vendors?
I don't think it's just a third-party vendor thing. I think that it's pretty, we see consistently that people with lived experience are treated as either like a superhero who's meant to solve all of the problems around the assistive tech that they have to use, as if they are specialists in everything, or they're treated as if they know nothing. And neither of those are appropriate. Like, you wouldn't ask me to fix if I said my computer didn't work, I would reasonably expect the help desk to be able to help me with my computer. If I'm a JAWS user, I would expect that same service. If I'm a Switch user, I would expect that same service. And yet it seems that some of us have a better service than others. And then on the other side of that, we have these great committees that are formed in organizations for disability or for equality or for pride or whatever. But it's really interesting how many people love these committees when it comes to lunches, or afternoon teas, and yet ignore their feedback when it comes to the services that they need in an organization, and then don't pay them either. So you have this lovely system where people give feedback. That feedback is ignored. Externals are paid to do work, who then sort of gaslight that person, say, oh, no, you can use it. It's just the way you're using it, but they can't, they're not using it. And then are expected to do their job. So, you know, I don't have a happy solution to this. I think it's alive and valid. This is where consultants can take a place though and step up. I mean, I think it's our job to actually go, actually, the people in your organization, what they're saying is correct, and you're just ignoring them, rather than you know, taking for granted that it's too difficult, that it costs too much. Because then why are you wasting your money on a web accessibility piece? The only caveat I would make is that I think you still need to test with users who are the users of your product, not just with people within the organization who may well use assistive tech. And a really great example of this was a product in Australia called Albert, which was a payment system that the Commonwealth Bank put in. They went through testing, they went through auditing, they tested with internal staff as well. But what they didn't do is test this product with people working in shops, shop assistants. It wasn't actually the people with disability that had a lot of the problems. It was the shop assistants actually not being able to use the equipment, using it inappropriately, it having the wrong type of interface on it, which was fine for people who are great at banks and who worked in banks, but was not fine for the everyday user. You know, and there were more problems, but fundamentally, I think they're the two bits. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there.
No, you didn't, Manisha. I mean, it's profound to find out the true root causes of what these challenges are, and it takes this kind of research to deliver that. There's also, I think, an element of the consideration of the potential conflict of interest with consultancies, because they're potentially incentivized to be kept in there and to continue to drain that budget. But at the same time, we recognize the need for accessibility experts, as Amanda said, to come in there and pick up the things that those that are doing the day-to-day just don't often see. I suppose finding that balance is important. And Manisha, you said it before, it's about timing. It's about the situation that an organization is in, and there are often definitely times where they desperately need external assistance. So I think that's definitely quite consistent with many of the observations that are being made here. I've got a simpler question, I hope, or actually might end up being quite complicated, but let's see. Amanda, what is the most important work that you do?
I don't know if that's simple. Look, I think the most important work I do is do education in this space, is to tell people that this is something that needs to be done and that they can do it. I think that's the most important thing that any of us can do. I often say when I do training or a presentation, if you take nothing else away from something I've said, just remember to ask, is this accessible? Because once you ask, someone has to go, is it? And that will start a chain reaction. And to me, that is 100% the most important thing I can do, is get people asking, is this accessible?
Amazing. And Léonie, can you share what is the most important thing that you do?
Hire good people.
Yes.
You know, our company, and I'm sure Manisha and Amanda will say exactly the same about theirs. It's not about any one of us. It's about just having, you know, the right people, smart people, smarter than me people quite often in our team's case anyway, you know, all sharing the same philosophy, the same attitude, same work ethic, same willingness to change things for the better. And then, you know, hopefully, and if they're all listening to me and rolling their eyes at this point, giving the people on your team the space, the freedom, the responsibility to do what they do best. And I think that's probably the most important thing that I can do in the scheme of things.
Léonie, don't you just wish that people would just take some credit where it's due, especially the folks in your amazing team?
Yes, because they're British for the most part, which really makes it worse.
Makes it really difficult for them to take a compliment.
Yes.
And Manisha, for you, what is the most important work that you do?
So unlike Amanda and Léonie, I haven't I haven't come from a accessibility background. So the most important thing I do is get things wrong prolifically and all the time. So I have a great team of people who get things right. But I think inclusion's a journey. And there's often a lot of shame that people feel in getting things wrong. And you know, it becomes, we're all a bit perfectionists. And I think that if we can get things wrong and accept that and keep moving forward, that's a good thing. And if I get things wrong, hopefully that shows other people that it's okay for them to get things wrong as well and admit it and fix it.
Manisha, it feels like you create a safe space for everybody to have safety to experiment and innovate. That safety gives you the freedom to get things wrong and the joy of celebrating together when things are right, I'm sure.
Look, to be honest, I'm terrified when I get things wrong sometimes, especially on a stage. When I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, it terrifies me. But then I kind of think, well, if I'm working in a company and I'm building a site that's going to be audited, or if I want to do the best thing by our customers, that same terror is hitting that person, right? And there's a point where it's better to get it wrong and try to do something than not do it at all. And, you know.
At least you're giving it a go, right?
That's right.
Amanda, what are some of the most common questions you get asked about accessibility?
Oh, goodness. I get a lot of why.
Why this?
Why? Look, a lot of people want to know statistics that we just can't give them. How many screen reader users are there?
Yeah.
You know, I can't tell you how many are coming to your webpage every day. What I can tell you is that there are lots of people who use lots of different assistive technologies. And if we build this right, they're going to be more likely to get the information you want to get out to them. So that's probably, again, it's so funny how so much of this comes back to just educating people. You know, even when we conduct an audit, which we do plenty of, it's walking them through those audits. It's asking. So I can sit down with the dev team and they're going to get very technical with me. Or you can sit down with management and talk about strategically moving forward. One of my favorite, we had some breakout sessions last Wednesday. Gosh, it was a week ago at TPAC. And one of my favorite ones was W3C's maturity model, digital accessibility maturity model, which, by the way, everyone should try and give feedback for. It's fantastic. And just educating people on how to go about that. How do we understand how accessible we are as an organization? Those are things that we often get asked, and they're deep dives, they're hand-holding exercises, they're journeys to take.
Amazing. And Léonie, in consideration of the bits that you don't like or the bits that you're not necessarily all about accessibility, but the other stuff in business like your taxes and accounting and HR, what's your advice in managing the non-cool stuff in the business?
Be prepared for it. I knew when I got into this, that's what I would be spending a lot of my time doing, and that certainly turned out to be true. I dislike it every bit as much as I did 4.5 years ago when I first started things. So, but be prepared for that. You know, you can't run a consultancy or any other kind of business, of course, without being prepared to, well, run a business. It's probably the biggest learning curve I've ever been on in my entire life. Learning about taxes, working across regions, trying to work in different currencies for our customers in different countries, trying to work out payroll and all of those things is
unreal.
Yeah, but we were fortunate. We found a great accountant who worked with us in the early days, who really understood when I said, look, I'm going to ask you lots of really, really stupid questions, and he answered every single one of them in exactly the right way, as though I knew nothing. And that was absolutely amazing. So finding good people to help you who are the best in their industry, to help you do the stuff that certainly for me at least I was least good at, weakest at overall. So it's necessary. And of course, from an invoicing point of view, there's that old thing about getting everybody paid at the end of the month. So yeah, it has its own rewards, of course.
but never letting them go ever again, right, Léonie, once you've found them?
Hell no. Absolutely not. You're right.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I've kept a couple of doozies for last. Manisha, is artificial intelligence the enemy of accessibility, or is it an enabler?
Well, it depends. I think your other question about what's that common thing people ask you, my favorite is, oh, will AI just do all of this for us?
Yeah.
So you don't need to do accessibility because AI is here or technology is here and it will solve the accessibility problems that we have. I mean, just listening to this conversation, there are things we all argue about. There are things where we kind of go, yeah, but is this better or is this better? Accessibility is actually a human consequence, not an not just a binary thing. So I think that when we think about AI, it's really about how can AI help us do the binary pieces and how can humans do the non-binary pieces that we need to do for the world to succeed. But if we want AI to succeed, we need to make sure that the creation of AI also is created to be accessible.
And your allocation between binary and non-binary, is that a natural allocation for you?
Explain what you mean by that.
Your use of the allocation of AI for binary and for humans taking care of non-binary tasks, is that a natural division for you? And do you find that to be a suitable division of
it does.
labor, so to speak?
What I'm talking about is that, we know that humans are irrational. And it's not a bad thing. That's actually a really good thing that humans are irrational, because what it means is that in 1 second, we can actually process a whole lot of data, social mores, social consequences, and social benefit that AI cannot, simply cannot do, technology can't do. And so we can make decisions that are based on compassion. We can make decisions based on experience. We can make decisions based on not just the past, but future imagination in ways that AI can't, right? And so there are, I'm not saying no to AI, but I am just saying if you have a pen but don't know what story you're going to write, the story you're going to come up with is going to be pretty shit, right? And it's the thing.
It certainly is a watch this
that
space.
was my technical way of explaining.
It was philosophically deep. I really felt that,
Sorry.
Manisha. But I can say that it's a watch this space scenario, because I suppose as artificial intelligence becomes more sentient, we must wonder what the limits are. But
and I'd love you to pass that to Léonie and Amanda, because there's a lot of work being done at W3C around this area as well, and and that's far more practical than my philosophical.
Your philosophical contribution here is absolutely valuable. Amanda, what are your thoughts?
Manisha's right. We'll start with that. But no, look, there is a lot of work. W3C is working in the space around edge technologies, where we're trying to get away from the word overlay, because it has traumatic responses, which is fair enough. Sure. What's really interesting about sort of the potential around developing standards for this sort of these sort of technologies and what they can do and what they can't do is understanding sort of, I guess, the limitations. We know that something can tell us if it has alt text or not. What it can't do is tell us if that alt text is correct or in context or appropriate. So those are the things. Understanding that AI will always have the limitation of not being human is really important. It's not going to replace us as humans, and that's also equally important. This isn't the lead up to Terminator, but what it does do is it gives us a great opportunity for us to harness the technology potentially to make our jobs easier, but more importantly, to make the world more accessible. We can potentially harness this technology to do better. Well, we have to make sure we do that within the ethical framework of our human conscious, and I think it's about ethics and values. And whenever anyone talks to me about edge technologies or layovers or whatever it is we want to call them, it has to be done within our ethics and values in order for it to stand up. And to me, that's the most important thing. We need to not be scared of the technologies. We need to harness their powers, but know that we have to do that within our ethical frameworks.
It's what fundamentally makes us human, our beliefs and our ethics. And Léonie, given your experience, I'd love to hear your viewpoint on the topic.
So I think Mannish and Amanda both made two important points. For me, it's not so much about the AI itself, but actually about the humans that are using the AI, and as Amanda said, the ethics that they are following or upholding. There are a lot of bad actors out there at the moment that are using AI as a marketing tool to sell quick fixes that don't really work. There's a lot of evidence to confirm that. There are large language model AI systems being offered that will or claim to give you accessible code examples when you ask for them, except it turns out that because, like most large language models, it's trained on all the data that's out there in the world, and an awful lot of that, of course, is dreadful when it comes to being an accessibility example. So people are picking up these code examples thinking that they're good accessibility, and they're not. So I think that's the side we need to watch out for. On the negative part of things is actually the way these tools are being marketed as being solutions. The tools in and of themselves have great potential, I think, and we can see that in the way generative AI is being used to help people like myself with a sight impairment. There's an app called Be My Eyes, in which you can call on an anonymous sighted volunteer with the help from your video camera to get someone to be your eyes temporarily. But they've just added in a beta version that uses ChatGPT-4's image recognition intelligence. And it's absolutely extraordinary. I can take a picture of something and the level of detail of description I get back is phenomenal. And what makes it even more wonderful is that I can interrogate it. So if I want to know, you've told me there's a plant on the coffee table in front of me. What kind of plant is it? What color flowers does it have? Does it have flowers? And so you can have that much more human kind of style interaction, because you can ask for details, you can ask for specifics. A friend of mine was telling me yesterday they'd taken a picture that included some books on a shelf, and they were able to ask, the generative AI, what's the title of that book? Who's it written by? And then what really makes it amazing is, what else has that author written? So nothing to do with the image, but you can take it out into the abstract, which is, of course, a lot like the conversation you can have with a human if you were in that same situation. So there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, but actually, for me, it's the humans and their ethics that are the bit that concern me the most in the negative side of things.
What seems to be a common...
Sorry, Maka, can I just add one small
please,
thing to
Manisha,
that one?
please.
And that is the other thing that's really interesting and I think positive about the Be My Eyes ChatGPT-4 fiction is not only does it help Léonie when using Be My Eyes, but that Be My Eyes data is now part of the ChatGPT-4 data and is actually has a higher affordance to it, so that in fact ChatGPT is actually learning about what everyday people, including people who might have vision impairment, want because of the data going back the other way. So it's not just supporting one group, it's actually supporting all of us because we're getting richer data with and data that's often not in a data set. So I think that's really important to recognize as well.
Well, hearing these insights, I think it's sad that the negative sides of AI serve to almost be an echo chamber of the negative things about human beings fundamentally. Positive things absolutely are the same, and hopefully AI can be a positive extension of the good things of humanity, and hopefully we don't become the tyrants that we had originally despised, and that we can respect artificial intelligence in the future for the good things that it can bring, and hopefully it can be collaborative with us, as hopefully we can be collaborative with it one day. I can tell that there is such a natural conclusion to the night on this note, and I feel like it's worth me commenting on some of the feedback that we've had the pleasure of noting here in our comments here. Megan, you've written here, we can make decisions that break the rules, but it is still the right decision. What a profound comment. Amazing contribution, and thank you. And James, throughout the night, you've contributed a significant amount. How AI operates depends on our attitudes. If we don't care accessibility, it won't. And you're right, absolutely. So thank you very much to everybody that has contributed as part of this conversation. You are just as much a part of this conversation as the contributions of our amazing panelists. But we've come to that point in the night. I wish this could go on for the entire night, but alas, we've reached the end of the allotted time. And I must say, what amazing insights you've all provided tonight to all those aspiring accessibility experts that are out there that are looking on you as leaders in the field to say, wow, how do you do it? Can you please rub some of that absolutely amazing stardust on me and give me the encouragement to also be so good and so humble at the same time. I have to note that we've got some upcoming amazing events that are going to be distributed in the OZeWAI newsletter. So please make a note of those upcoming events. But I hope that everybody tonight has thoroughly enjoyed this panel discussion as I have. I think that tonight has been absolutely positive, and it's demonstrated to all of us that it's within us to be able to really do this. And I think one of the most heartwarming comments here is that it is in all of us, and that we have a network of supportive experts that just want us all to do very well at this because it matters. And it might be only of the benefit of the few, but ultimately it's the benefit for all. So thank you very much for your time tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Bree for any final words.
Look, thank you. No final words from me except just thank you to everyone. Thank you, Léonie, for your time. And you know, in the morning over there, and Manisha and Amanda too. And you're both traveling. You're both very busy. And Maka, wonderful moderating. We'll have you back anytime. We have plans for events for October, November, and December. And if there's anyone on the call that is interested in being on a panel or has the topics, we've got them in the surveys, the ideas, but also willing to discuss ideas with you. So please reach out to OZeWAI. Please join, please subscribe to the newsletter and support this networking opportunity that we've started to really, it's really taking off our OZeWAI community in Australia, and really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much.
Oh, and thanks to the people from around the world as well. There are
Absolutely.
people from other countries.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Keep
Everyone.
this
Thank you.
network
Thank you,
vibrant.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.